Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. Ethan Drake's fingers danced over the controls, his focus narrowed to a pinpoint as he directed his in-game team. Their virtual world pulsed around him, alien landscapes filled with glowing flora and jagged, hostile terrain. Above them, twin moons illuminated the scarred surface of the planet. The alien creatures swarmed in from the dark corners of the game's latest expansion, their forms flickering like glitches in a system that was never quite sure how to render their grotesque, inhuman shapes. "Ethan, they're breaching the north gate." A voice crackled through his headset. "I've got it," he replied, voice calm, almost too calm given the situation. His fingers flew. He directed resources, pulling energy from the reserve stockpile they had stashed just outside the walls of their base. It wasn't a large amount, but it would hold long enough. His team of 6 others from across the globe awaited on his orders. Ethan deployed a defensive drone swarm to the north gate, the miniature flying machines crackling with electric charges as they attacked the incoming alien wave. "Drone deployment successful," he muttered to himself, half out of habit. "Initiate repulsion field." The aliens hit the field like bugs splattering against a windshield. Their gnashing jaws and claws dissolved into pixelated dust as the drones cleaned up the rest of the wave. For the moment, they were safe. "That's why we follow Ethan," one of his teammates, a deep-voiced Australian named Pierce, said with a chuckle. "The man's a genius." Ethan didn't respond to the compliment. He rarely did. His mind was already running the next scenario, preparing for the game's escalating difficulty curve. Each wave was harder, more relentless than the last. Apocalypse Survival was designed that via incremental difficulty until even the best players hit their limit. But Ethan hadn't hit his yet. He never did. The victory screen flashed across the game's heads-up display, followed by the usual reward tally. Credits, new base upgrades, access to the next level of alien tech. All routine for someone of Ethan's rank. His team erupted in celebration, but he simply leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his dark, unruly hair. Another win. He rubbed his eyes, the strain from hours of gameplay finally catching up with him. As the top player in the game, he was used to the routine of winning, but lately, even the thrill of victory had started to feel hollow. He logged off the game, pulling off the immersive headset and setting it on his desk. His small apartment was dim, lit only by the screen's lingering glow. Ethan stretched, cracking his neck. It had been a long session, but he wasn't in the mood to unwind just yet. He was about to head to the kitchen for a drink when there was a knock at his door. Ethan frowned. He wasn't expecting anyone. Most of his friends teammates were virtual. People didn't just show up at his door. He walked over, peering through the peephole. A man in a dark suit stood outside, looking far too serious for Ethan's comfort. His expression was a mix of impatience and urgency. "Ethan Drake?" the man asked when Ethan opened the door slightly, still unsure whether to trust him. "Yeah, that's me." "Who's asking?" "Agent Monroe." "I'm with the government." "May I come in?" Ethan's first instinct was to shut the door, but something about the man's tone kept him in place. There was an edge to it, a weight that suggested this wasn't some ordinary government visit. Ethan stepped aside, allowing Monroe in. The agent moved swiftly, stepping into the small apartment with an air of authority. He wasted no time, pulling out a small tablet and handing it to Ethan. On it was a series of images, fuzzy at first, but then clear as day. Alien landscapes, structures, creatures that looked disturbingly familiar. "I'm sure you recognize these," Monroe said. His voice was cool, steady. Ethan blinked, staring at the images. This is from the game." Monroe shook his head. "Number." "It's not." The words hit Ethan harder than he expected. He glanced back at the tablet, heart starting to race as the implications began to sink in. These images, they weren't pixelated or rendered. They were real. "That's impossible," Ethan said, shaking his head. "It's just a game." "The game was based on classified information," Monroe replied, his tone devoid of any humor. The developers were given data about a planet outside our solar system, a rogue planet that's now on a direct path towards us. Ethan swallowed, his mouth suddenly dry. You're saying this? This is real? Monroe nodded. The game was a way to simulate what would happen when the planet got close enough for these things to come to us, and it's happening now. We need your help. Why me? Ethan's voice came out sharper than he intended. I'm just a gamer. You're not just a gamer. You're the best. Monroe's eyes narrowed. And right now, we need the best. Ethan sat down, his mind spinning. This had to be some kind of prank, right? But the look on Monroe's face told him otherwise. There was no punchline coming. The agent continued, we've been preparing for this for years, but we didn't expect the planet to accelerate its approach. Our defenses aren't ready, and we're facing an invasion unlike anything we've ever seen. You've fought these creatures in the game, you know their tactics, their weaknesses. That's why we need you to help guide our defense strategy. Ethan stared at the tablet again, the images swimming in front of his eyes. This was real. All of it. How long do we have? He asked, his voice low. Not long, Monroe replied. We've already lost a lunar base to the first wave. The weight of the situation settled on Ethan's chest like a ton of bricks. He wasn't just playing a game anymore. This was life or death. This is insane, Ethan thought, but he couldn't ignore the facts. If the images were real, then the stakes were too. He'd spent thousands of hours in that virtual world. Every corner, every strategy, every alien attack pattern was etched into his brain. And now, it was all coming to life. Monroe's voice cut through his thoughts. We'll take care of the logistics. You'll be briefed on everything once we reach the command center. Are you in? Ethan took a deep breath, his mind still reeling. He didn't have a choice. If what Monroe was saying was true, this was bigger than anything he'd ever faced before. Bigger than him. Bigger than the game. I'm in, Ethan said, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. Monroe gave a curt nod, then gestured for Ethan to follow him. Let's go. Time's running out. Ethan had been in some strange places before, but nothing compared to the underground complex they took him to. As the elevator descended, Monroe filled him in on the details. Though most of it went over Ethan's head, he was more focused on the fact that the world as he knew it might be ending. It was one thing to play a game where the fate of humanity was in your hands, but it was something entirely different when it was real. When the elevator doors opened, Ethan was greeted by a scene straight out of a science fiction movie. Huge screens covered the walls, displaying real-time feeds of the Earth's defense networks, the moon bases, and the rogue planet's approach. The air buzzed with the hum of machines and the chatter of technicians racing to prepare for the coming onslaught. Welcome to the Solar Defense Initiative, Monroe said as they stepped off the elevator. This is where we're coordinating the planet's defense. Ethan's gaze swept the room, taking in the military personnel, scientists, and engineers scrambling to get everything in order. It was a controlled chaos, but beneath the surface, he could sense the fear. These people were facing an enemy they didn't fully understand, and they were running out of time. Dr. Ava Mitchell will be your main point of contact, Monroe said, gesturing to a woman standing in front of a large tactical screen. She's been leading the research on the aliens. Ava turned to greet them, her brown eyes sharp and focused. Ethan Drake, she said, sizing him up. I've heard about you. I just didn't think we'd actually be using a gamer to save the world. Trust me, I didn't either, Ethan replied, managing a small, nervous smile. Ava wasted no time leading Ethan to the tactical screen. The display showed the rogue planet, Orion V, steadily moving through space, its course unmistakably aimed at the solar system. Zooming in, Ethan saw what had to be the alien ships, dark and massive, hovering just beyond Earth's sensor range. We've studied their movements for months, Ava said, her voice clipped and efficient. But we're still behind. These things are relentless, and our current tactics aren't slowing them down. That's where you come in. Ethan blinked at the screen, absorbing the information. "I'm guessing you've already tried the basics: artillery, nukes, standard defensive measures?" Ava nodded. "Everything we have. But they adapt too quickly. Our biggest problem is that they're not fighting like any enemy we've faced. It's not even war by our definitions. It's almost calculated, like they're testing us." Ethan's mind spun back to the game. He had faced these kinds of strategic maneuvers before. They're probing for weaknesses, testing your responses. They're learning, just like in the game. Ava raised an eyebrow. "That's what we suspected. So, what's your recommendation?" Ethan hesitated for a moment, feeling the weight of the room's eyes on him. But then his instincts kicked in. In the game, the trick wasn't to outgun them, it was to outthink them. They react to patterns, to anything that seems predictable. If you want to beat them, you have to act outside their expectations. He walked over to the console, tapping through the data as his mind worked through the possibilities. "You need to use guerrilla tactics, diversionary strikes, decoys, even fakes. Make them second guess every move you make. But more than that, you've got to be faster than them at adaptation." Ava crossed her arms, listening intently. "You're suggesting we scatter our defenses?" "That sounds risky." "It is," Ethan admitted. "But it's the only way to stop them from pushing in with brute force." In the game, they'd send a huge wave at one weak point, expecting players to throw everything they had to defend. But if you make them think there are other threats at other fronts to deal with, they'll have to split their forces. It's all about misdirection. Monroe, who had been standing off to the side, finally spoke up. "What about our resources? Earth doesn't have an infinite supply of drones and troops to throw around." Ethan looked at him sharply. "That's why you make them think you do. You don't need real soldiers everywhere. Use holograms, old equipment, anything that can create the illusion of strength." The room went silent for a moment as everyone absorbed the gravity of Ethan's suggestion. Ava's fingers hovered over the console, her eyes locked on the screen in front of them. "All right," she said slowly, "let's test this. I'll get the engineers to start modifying our drone systems for decoys. But we'll need more time for a full rollout." "The next wave hits in less than 24 hours. Ethan nodded. "Then we make this first battle a test. We won't win it outright, but we can throw them off balance. They won't know what's real and what's fake." For the next several hours, Ethan worked with Ava and her team, adjusting defense grids and implementing his strategies. It was surreal watching the game he knew so well being applied to a real-life scenario. But there was no room for hesitation. If he slipped up, people would die. As the countdown to the next wave approached, the tension in the room grew palpable. Ethan stood at the command center, watching a screens filled with live feeds from various defense stations scattered across Earth and the Moon. Engineers buzzed around, making last-minute adjustments to the decoy systems. Soldiers, pilots, and drone operators waited in silence for the inevitable attack. Ethan felt the weight of their expectations. These weren't just faceless avatars. Real people, real lives depended on him now. Suddenly, a warning siren blared. The aliens were on the move. "Here we go," Ava muttered, eyes fixed on the incoming blips moving across the radar. Ethan leaned forward, gripping the edge of the console. "Remember," he said into the mic that connected him to Earth's forces, "don't engage until I give the signal." "We need them to believe the decoys are real targets." The alien ships broke into the atmosphere like meteorites, their dark forms streaking through the sky. Across Earth's defense stations, soldiers watched in awe as the ships hovered, silent and ominous. Then, just as Ethan had predicted, the aliens began their assault, concentrating on the most heavily fortified positions. "They're going for the obvious targets," Ava said, her voice tight with tension. "Good," Ethan replied. "That's what we want." He waited, fingers twitching with anticipation as the aliens unloaded wave after wave of drones and ground troops on Earth's key defense hubs. But just as the battle intensified, Ethan gave the order, "Activate the decoys." Around the globe, holographic projections of military bases and defensive structures flickered to life. Old, Disused equipment hummed and rumbled, sending out false signals. The aliens shifted, detecting the new threats, just as Ethan had hoped. "They're diverting forces," one of the techs shouted, monitoring the radar. "Keep pushing them," Ethan ordered. "Make them spread thin. Don't let them regroup." As the alien forces split to engage the decoy sites, Earth's real defenses struck. Drone swarms and artillery opened fire, catching the aliens off guard. The first few waves of alien drones were obliterated in minutes, their ships left scrambling to adapt. Ethan could feel the adrenaline pumping through him, his mind working faster than ever. This was the kind of challenge he had thrived on in the game, only now it was real. Every move, every order had consequences. But they were working. They were winning. "Drake, we've got them." Pierce's voice crackled through Ethan's headset. He had been stationed at one of the decoy sites, coordinating the on-ground operations. "They're falling back." Ethan allowed himself a small smile. "Keep the pressure on them. We need to buy more time." The battle raged on, but Ethan's strategy had turned the tide. The aliens, disoriented by the decoys and unable to consolidate their forces, were forced to retreat, leaving behind wreckage and debris. Earth had survived the first wave. When the last of the alien ships finally broke away from Earth's atmosphere, retreating to the safety of Orion V, the room erupted in cheers. Technicians high-fived each other, soldiers slumped in relief, and even Ava allowed herself a weary smile. Ethan, however, remained silent. His mind was already moving ahead, anticipating the next move. "That was just the first wave," he said, looking at Monroe and Ava. "They'll be back, stronger and smarter." Monroe nodded. "But now we know we can beat them." "Thanks to you." Ava stepped forward, a hint of admiration in her eyes. "You saved a lot of lives today, Ethan." He nodded, but there was no satisfaction in his heart. "Yeah, but it's not over. We need to adapt faster than they can. Otherwise, this was just a delay." The room quieted again, the weight of his words settling in. They had won this round, but the war was far from over. Ethan had lived through endless battles in the game, but this was different. The stakes were higher, and the consequences of failure were real.